Lots of people even wonder if they have a voice inside their head. We all do. It's our ability to silently use language, which is an amazing tool of the human mind. Lets you do a lot of great things, from memorizing a grocery list to motivating yourself to making meaning out of your life. But it's this precarious tool that often jams up on us when we need it most.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Let's give another round of applause for Ethan.
Thank you. Feel like a bit of an imposter being in the grown-ups forum.
Oh.
Yeah, just don't feel like a grown-up all the time. So.
We're there. We're adulting tonight.
That's right.
Well, thank you again, everyone, for being here, and thank you to everyone who's listening at home. Dr. Cross, I first came across his work with his first book, Chatter, which actually really impacted me personally. It's an incredible book with like such amazing research about the voice that we hear in our heads and how everyone has a different internal narrator, essentially, and how much that actually really affects our lives. So I'm really excited to introduce you all to Ethan's work, and we'll just get right into it. So I first want to kind of zoom out a little bit and hear about where did you grow up and how did you first get interested in psychology?
Well, I grew up in New York, in a small town called Brooklyn. Any New Yorkers here, Brooklynites? Okay. One. Okay, thank you. I was like really hostile territory here. And, you know, there were two key influences in terms of my early life and what ultimately led me to go into psychology. Chatter tells the story of one of those influences, my dad. Shift, my new book, tells the story of my other influence, my grandmother, my bubby. So the quick version of that is my dad was this very interesting, colorful character. So on the one hand, he fit the stereotype of a gruff New Yorker. And what I mean by that is, like, if you want to just have a mental image, just imagine kind of a beat up New York Yankees hat, big bushy mustache, cigarette dangling, you know, from his lips, aggressive on the road, and had really great dexterity with the usage of his middle digit on the road, right? No matter who was in the car, including his son. So there was this kind of larger than life, just like abrasive character. But then on the other hand, this was someone who was enamored with Eastern philosophy. Never graduated from college, but he just loved reading about Hinduism and Buddhism and talking to me about it from the time I was a little kid, which I assure you I did not want to talk to him about. And he would talk to me about the mind. And one of the first lessons he gave me was, hey, whenever you get into trouble, you get into a fight with mommy or daddy or an argument, turn your attention inward. Try to get to the root of the problem and find the kernel, you know, these like aphorisms that he would give. And anyway, that was a way that I got interested in psychology, got to college, and I learned it's not always easy to use your mind to solve problems. Sometimes it works really well, but oftentimes we turn our attention inward and we just start spiraling. We ruminate, we worry, we experience what I call chatter, ergo, the name of my first book. It's ultimately what led me to go to graduate school. Bubby, very different character. So my grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and she very narrowly escaped being slaughtered along with the rest of her family in the early 1940s. Just a stroke of luck, she was pulled off the line to get exterminated and lived in the woods for several years, evaded Nazis. It was kind of like a Steven Spielberg film, her early life. And I spent a lot of time with her growing up because I would go to her house every day after school while my parents were working. And I always wanted to hear her stories. I just, you know, she was like a second mom. Tell me what happened in the war. How did you do this and that? And she would continually evade the question, right? And she would actually say to me, don't ask why. And why is a crooked letter. Have you ever heard that phrase? It's kind of interesting if you think about it. It is literally a crooked letter, but it's also, there's a symbolic meaning to that. You know, don't go into it because it can set you down a rabbit hole, maybe into a chatter zone. So she never really talked about the war, except for one day a year when there were these Remembrance Day ceremonies that were held by her, my grandfather, and their fellow survivors, where they would get up on at a podium in a local synagogue and they would just let it out. And I would hear I would see emotion in ways that I would never witnessed before. And so she had this ability to keep it at bay, but then engage and go back and forth. And I always found that just really curious. And I have kept thinking about it ever since, and it's informed a lot of what I've done in my professional career, where I've tried to understand how can people, all of us, adaptively manage our emotional lives. And so maybe we'll come back to the lens I now apply to her life. But those are my two early influences. And went to graduate school. So I went to college, was a psych major, religious studies minor, then went to graduate school to learn about how to use the tools of psychology and neuroscience to make sense of our emotional lives. Got a dream job right out of graduate school at the University of Michigan. Do we have any Wolverine fans here? Whoa, this is amazing. Okay, wait, this is part 2. Do we have any Ohio State fans here? All right, we're going to rock and roll today. This is all good. That's okay. Penn State's okay. And that's about it. So,
yes,
the origin story.
Super helpful. I think behind the book, people don't always know the author's story, right? How they come. And you've done such a beautiful job of weaving your story into your books, which are, research-backed and very science-heavy, but very poetic at the same time, I must say. So before we get into your amazing second book, Shift, can you give us just a quick snapshot of what Chatter was about?
So Chatter was about, number one, this voice in our head that we all have, but seldom talk about. Anyone here ever go to a cocktail party and, come up to someone who starts telling you about the voice in their head? You run the other way if that happens. Right? You've heard some people talk about it. It's a very private, these conversations we have with ourselves. Lots of people even wonder if they have a voice inside their head. We all do. It's our ability to silently use language, which is an amazing tool of the human mind. Lets you do a lot of great things, from memorizing a grocery list to motivating yourself to making meaning out of your life. But it's this precarious tool that often jams up on us when we need it most. So this looks like a very well-adjusted crowd that very seldom worries and ruminates. Is that fair approximation of your... No. We all worry and ruminate at times. And so the book really grapples with, why does that happen? And when you find yourself going down the rabbit hole of rumination and worry, what does science have to say about the tools you can use to right the ship, so to speak, so that you're not getting rid of this inner voice, you're not silencing it, but you're harnessing it to make it work for you rather than against you. And so Chatter was the first book. A lot of effort went into it. My hair was a different color when I started. Came out different after. We could talk about how that works. And spent several years talking about it around the world, actually, after it came out. And a really interesting thing happened at the end of those conversations, which began virtually during COVID, but then would transition to in-person stuff. People would come up to me after, and they would say something to the effect of, "Professor Cross, thank you so much for," well, they weren't that exaggerating. They weren't that positive, but "Thank you for talking to me about this stuff. I had no idea about language and the voice in our head. It was so useful. But why do we even have emotions in the first place? Or what do you think about meditation? And why does cleaning up make a difference when I'm feeling upset?" They'd have all these different questions about their emotions, and it felt like I had just given a presentation on inflammation and how to combat it, but they had questions about cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, and all the other kinds of things that might occur to us. And so that was a real motivator to write a book that could have otherwise been titled Welcome to Your Emotional Life in many ways. What are emotions? I mean, how many people here would feel comfortable coming up, switching chairs with me, and defining an emotion for everyone in this room? Anyone? Any takers? That's pretty amazing. According to many scientists, we start experiencing rudimentary forms of emotion when we're in the womb. We are bathed in emotion throughout our lives. There's just one wonderful study in the book. It tries to approximate what percentage of our waking hours we spend experiencing different kinds of emotion. You want to play a game with me? You want to guess? How many people think it's 20% or 20% or less? 20% of the time. 30.
What's the question?
How much time do you spend experiencing some kind of emotion?
All the time.
All the time. 90% of the time. We're an emotional species, but we have trouble understanding what it even is, let alone the more important question, pragmatically, what can you do about your emotions if you want to push them around because they're pushing you around? And it turns out we know a lot about how to do that, how to manage your emotions. And so that was the goal behind writing this book. And my hair was already white, so it's fine.
I think it's such a valuable transition in a way. It's really interesting to go from a book about what we experience as kind of a voice, right? It's difficult to name or identify because it's always there. It's a constant. I don't know how many of us really stop to name it as such, right? It's probably very informed by emotions, right? So to go from that to something that, in a way, when I think about emotions, I do think about the body more. And I know you explore the sensory domain and how our sensory world impacts emotions. And I think that's a very valuable link to explore. And so can you tell us a little bit about that link and how we can use our sensory sort of awareness to shift our emotions?
So sensation, right? How we take in information around the world. You've got like the equivalent of satellite dishes mounted all over your body, which helps you understand the world that you're interacting with, right? See, sight, sound, touch, smell. We're taking in information about our surroundings. That whole apparatus can be harnessed to strategically push your emotions in particular directions. All of you know this intuitively, and yet I'm pretty sure all of you do not strategically use this tool when you are struggling. And I say that not because I can peer into your minds and know exactly what you do, but I know the data surrounding this. This was something that I was blind to up until an experience I had with my daughter. So let me share that story with you maybe. So I used to coach soccer on the weekends, and I loved coaching soccer on the weekends. I'd work all week, and I would look forward to this. And typically, my youngest daughter, Danny, would pop out of bed and just be ready to play, and it was great. And I'd kind of cheer her on from the sidelines, and all good. One morning, she is just like a sack of potatoes. She just has a glum look on her face. She doesn't want to get going. And I try to do all these parental, jujitsu moves to shift her mood. Nothing works. And I just kind of concede. I have a helpless response. Like, all right, it's going to be one of those Saturday mornings. We get in the car and we're not talking, but I've got my playlist hooked up, and all of a sudden my favorite song comes on the radio. I will tell you what it is, but you cannot judge me, you promise? Journey's Don't Stop Believin'. You know that one? Mm-hmm. It's cheesy, but it is powerful, right? And so it comes on, and I can't help it. I start doing this, and I'm singing out loud, and I look in the rearview mirror, and Danny's bopping her head along with me. Now, this song has particular meaning in Michigan, where I'm from, because there's a line about Detroit in the song, and they play it at our football stadium. So it's kind of in the DNA of all of us. And next thing I know, we're both kind of like jamming out, and we're both like really revved up. I pull up to the soccer field, and she darts out of the car, scores a gazillion goals, and life is good. Up until that moment, it really, of course, music affected me, but it never occurred to me that just how powerful it could. I mean, if I were to ask all of you here, why do you listen to music? What would you say? What would you say? What's that?
It feels good.
Feels. Yeah, so close to 100% of participants sampled in research say, when asked that question, they like to listen to music because they like the way it makes them feel. But if you then do studies, which we've done, where you ask people, the last time you were angry or anxious or sad, what did you do to manage your emotions? Only between 10 and 30% of participants report using music to push their emotion around. So music is a very, very powerful and effortless tool that you can use to give you a quick jump start in a particular direction. And it's a flexible tool. You can use it to increase the volume on certain positive or negative emotions, or to diminish them too. And it's one example of how your senses can be harnessed. All of your senses function in this regard. How many people here have kids? Okay. What was the first thing you did with your kid when they were born into this world? The very first thing. After the nurses inspected them, they gave them back to you. That's right. You cuddled them, right? Do you still give them an embrace every now and again?
You can ask Janara.
You want to demo it right now?
I don't want to embarrass her.
Affectionate but not creepy touch, important to have that distinction, is a powerful regulatory tool. Research shows that an affectionate embrace automatically elicits the release of a stress-fighting cocktail of chemicals, if you will, that help bring our negative emotions in check. Now, it does have to be wanted. There's research which shows that if it is encoded as creepy, it does not have positive effects, and you get in trouble with the law. So, not good. But what about smell? Anyone here wearing a scent? Perfume or a scented aftershave or anything? I see some. Okay, so I was just overseas, and I came back, and I went through the duty-free store, which I now have renamed an Emotion Regulation Emporium. Why is that?
For good or bad?
For good.
Really?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's up to you if you want to.
I find it overwhelming, overstimulating.
Well, you can go away, but it's if you want to buy a scent to influence how other people feel about you and how you feel about your perfume. Like, I'm staying in a lovely hotel here. My publisher, chose this hotel, and the moment I opened the door, wow, like this wonderful scent hit me. Has anyone ever had this experience in a nice hotel? You have this, they actually pump certain scents through the ventilation system to shift your emotions. So we could keep going down, this all of our senses. Part of the way sensation works, if you want to geek out with me, is there are connections to emotional networks in the brain. Because we need to know, approach, avoid. So knowing this, you can harness your senses strategically to push your emotions around. And I've got, on my phone, I've got playlists to push my emotions in different directions. And so that's the story with senses. It is an underutilized, easy to use tool. Not all the tools I talk about in my book are easy. Some are hard, and that's fine. But we know that the easier something is, the more likely people are going to be to use it, because we are all lazy organisms by design. We like to conserve resources. So, you will never hopefully look at your phone the same way. It's an emotion regulation tool.
I love that. That's a great idea. A playlist for different emotions, like pushing yourself one direction or another.
Yeah, and one mantra of the book, one constant theme is, some of you probably have used music at times in your life to push your emotions around, but we often stumble on these solutions. We're not really strategic and deliberate, and I think that's one promise of knowing about these tools. People often ask me, do I ever struggle with emotions? Yes, I'm a human being. Sometimes I say, no, I'm perfect, and I wait to see what they think. But of course I do. But what I am really good at is I have tools I reflexively reach for when I find myself becoming overwhelmed or underwhelmed. And as a result, I think I spend a lot less time in those problematic states. And I think if we can help society spend less time in those problematic states, we'll be doing a lot of good in the world. So
I totally agree. Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking of all the things I use, and they are largely sensory. You know, I mean, there's so many different tools out there.
What do
I
you
know,
I'd
right?
love
What
to
do
know.
I do? I do this sometimes. You know, it's
Self-touch?
like just like
Yeah.
specifically on my chest. I feel like that calms me down.
Then there's a study I cite in the book about how, like, there's a soothing touch that people can do to help calm them down in stressful.
Yeah.
Or, like, you know, some people do this.
Right. Like
Or even
kind
like
of
one of
fidget.
these things. Tell us more.
I feel like I heard Andrew Huberman mention this one thing on X, where he inhales, but he does it like in sort of like iterations. Like he'll go, hold it, exhale.
Mm-hmm.
I started using that a lot, and that has helped a lot. I definitely use exercise, running and jogging. Like if I just find that I'm too overwhelmed or I'm having too many thoughts at once and it's just starting to feel like noisy, I will go jogging for 5 or 10 minutes, like right out front of my house.
And that's an example of what I would call a kind of cocktail of tools being, because there's absolutely a sensory component involved in that, but you're switching up your attention. So
Right.
You're taking in different things. There's also likely going to be an endorphin response. I'm guessing you go for a while, right? 8 to 10 miles minimum.
Absolutely.
So it's a multifactorial bang, which is also can be very useful. Like, one of my pet peeves is when I am asked, so don't ask me this, what is the one thing you should do to manage your emotions? Can't answer that question. I can't like authentically answer that question, because I know from the science that we don't do one thing. We do many different things. And sometimes, like, you know, exercise is doing multiple things at once. And so there are ways of combining different tools to have their really positive effects.
That makes absolute sense. And like you were saying, so much of this is intuitive, and we've all, like, throughout our lives, we all just develop these different tools. I mean, people joke about this and there's memes, but like if someone's feeling agitated, sometimes they're just hot. Or sometimes they're just hungry. And so I think it actually can take a long time for people to figure out what the thing is for them in particular.
Absolutely. So, you know, there are dozens of tools I go over, and I would say you're going to be familiar with a lot of them. There are going to be some that you're less familiar with. But the whole point here is to be more deliberate. Get all of them on your radar, and then start thinking about how to incorporate different combinations of these tools into your lives. That is the big challenge I think we all face. And if we can meet that challenge, I think we will be much better adjusted.
I agree. Yeah. And you go over so many interesting and informative examples. One I'm thinking of is the power of changing your environment,
Yeah.
which I think is really interesting, because I think in our sort of memification of pop psychology, for example, when we talk about, oh, you just need to get away or you need to change your environment, some people just kind of think that they have to just completely like restructure their lives or something. And I think you talk about that in the book. Like, it doesn't have to be so extreme.
Yeah.
But talk to us about that. Like, what are the different ways that people can change their environments in really small, tiny micro ways, and the macro?
Okay. So let me just kind of give you a frame, and then we'll dive into the space. So I think about the tools that we can use to manage our emotions. I call them shifters, right? Because you could shift your emotions, increase or decrease their intensity, increase or decrease how long they last. You could shift from one emotion to the next. So that's what shifting is all about. There are shifters that exist within us, like sensation. These are inside us, right? And we can pull on those whenever we want. But then there's also ways of shifting from the outside in. And our spaces are a great example of that. Other people are another one. With spaces, there are lots of ways that you can strategically interact with your physical environments to help you attain a desired emotional end state. So if we start at the very micro level, right, like how could you design your space? Here, the thing to think about is putting things in your space to activate certain desirable reactions and taking things away from your space to remove undesirable reactions. So let me make that really concrete. I have a problem that I confess in the book, and I will confess it to you here. My problem is a food called pizza. Does anyone else have a pizza problem? I love pizza. I have a love affair with it. I have had it my whole life. I try to stay healthy, but if pizza is in my proximity, all bets are off. And so I know, like when we have a party, like a Super Bowl party, we're not having one this year, but I buy a lot of pizza. Inevitably, I buy more than people eat. And then we have a problem because there are 3 pies left over and everyone's on their way. And I know that if it's in the refrigerator, I'm going to eat it, right? And I know I shouldn't eat it after 8 o'clock because that's not good for me. And so I will remove that item from my surroundings, right? I'll just pizza doggy bags, right, to everyone who comes. And I will admit it here, even though this may sound wasteful, I will sometimes even throw it out, right? Sounds terrible, I know, don't judge. It's that or my heart health, right? Like, so I know it's very hard. I try to give it away first. What I'm doing there is I'm removing a cue from my environment that is eliciting an undesirable emotional reaction. I took my cell phone out of my jacket pocket and I put it in my other pocket here because I didn't want that vibrating during this presentation, because I knew if that's in my physical proximity, it was going to elicit an undesirable emotional response. This is why you should always either best to just take it out of your field of vision entirely. If you can't do it, certainly turn it over so you can't see the screen. Like I tell my students, I want you to close your laptops entirely. Take the cell phone, put it in your bag. I don't want any trigger. So that's removing things. Then we can also bring things into our environment. I did a study several years ago where we had people think about really painful experiences from their past. And we showed them pictures of loved ones right after they thought about these experiences. We did that in one condition. Other condition, we showed them other people's loved ones. So I'd look at my mom or your mom. You're very lovely. But you did not have a reparative effect on how quickly I recovered from thinking about this experience. My mom did. And so from that study, we learned that simply glancing at images of what we call attachment figures, people who you're securely connected with, that speeds up the way we recover from distress. So, I dropped a few $100 after that study on picture frames and pictures, and they're now strategically placed around all of my offices. So wherever I glance, I see a photo. I've got plants all over my offices because I know the effect that glancing at green things, what that can do for me. So those are ways that we can design our spaces in a very strategic way. If we go one step up, we can also think about what are the spaces around us that are restorative. So when my kids were little, it was always, this sticks out to me, whenever they would get really upset about something, they would just say, I just want to go home. I just want to go to my room. Their room was a sense, this safe place for them. There's a sense of security. So we don't just attach to other people, we also attach to places. You all have places that are sources of resilience, right? Like, so for me, it's the Arboretum near my home. It's the tea house where I wrote my first book. It's one of my offices on campus. When I'm in those spaces, I just feel a sense of safety and security. And so the research shows that visiting those kinds of places can actually help you deal with adversity. So, a take home here is think about what are the little, like, does anyone here ever watch like Jason Bourne spy movies? Am I the only? So you know how there are like safe houses when people are trying to evade the bad guys, right? And you go to the safe house, it's safe. We all have those safe spots, but how strategic are we in terms of visiting them when we're in distress? So that's a little bit on how our spaces can impact us.
Yeah.
Do you have any safe
space? Oh my gosh. Probably several. We were chatting before the event. My family, we spend a lot of time abroad. We're an international family, so I feel like I almost have these cues in like different countries. Because we return to the same places over and over.
I think you may be a spy.
I know, exactly. That's kind of what it sounds like. Yeah, I don't know. I will share that we got a dog recently. I mean, it was 2 years ago, but it's my first time having a pet. I didn't really grow up with animals. And so having an animal has made me have that sense of like place or home through that connection. I don't know, like as we go hiking a lot and we're always on trails together, and it's made me feel very at peace and at home in the mountains or in the hills and that kind of thing.
And nature for a lot of people, and I spent a lot of time talking about this in my first book, is a really effective emotion regulation tool, because what nature does is it captures our attention in a very gentle way. So when you're struggling with a problem, you're often hyper-focusing on it, but when you're in a safe and natural setting, like what are the hills by Berkeley? The Berkeley Hills?
Berkeley Hills,
Berkeley Hills, yeah. I remember the first time I ever visited the Berkeley Hills, I was very concerned about mountain lions. I shouldn't be though, right?
No.
Yeah. So once I got over that, it was tremendously restorative. You do have to perceive it to be safe. Once you think of it as safe, your attention gently is captured by the sights and sounds and smells around you, and it drifts away from your problems as a result. And so nature has shown to be restorative across dozens and dozens of research studies, and is probably like the archetypal safe space for folks.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk more about the other shifters.
Yeah.
And one that comes to mind is the reframing one, which I feel like might be a little bit more familiar for people, since so much of the talk around psychology and improving your well-being is like shifting how you think and things like that. So can you tell us about how you talk about reframing?
Yeah, so folks here familiar with the idea that you should change the way that you think to change the way you feel? It's like a powerful mantra within psychology. But there is a problem associated with that mantra, and it was elegantly described by a friend of mine when we were out to dinner with our partners several years ago. We're driving back from Detroit, and this friend of mine is really dealing with a difficult interpersonal situation at work. And he's describing it, and he's pessimistic about it. And his wife says to him, so and so, why don't you just think about it more positively? Just focus on the bright side. And then he turns around, he looks at her, and he goes, "Yeah, easier effing said than done," which I think captures something very resonant, right? Sometimes it's not so easy to reframe the way we think about things to feel better. What we've learned is that there are tools you can use to make it easier to reframe things, and they often involve shifting our perspective. And there are lots of different ways that you can do this, some of which have been discovered here at Berkeley with some scientists that I collaborate with. So I'll give you two of my favorites, but there are many more in the book. Two of my favorites involve what I call mental time travel. How many people here are familiar with the idea that you should really strive to be in the present as much as possible. Right? I don't like that phrase. I don't like that, because if that is your goal, to always be in the present, A, good luck. It's not possible to always be in the present. And B, you are taking off of the table many other tools that you can use to benefit in terms of shifting. So you can actually travel in time to your benefit. And I'll explain 2 ways that you could do it. One thing you could do when you're struggling with a problem is think about how you're going to feel about this tomorrow, next week, next month, next year. When you are dealing with an issue, you tend to hyper-focus on what's happening right now and how awful it is, and you lose sight of the fact that you've lived through millions of emotional experiences that all have the same basic time course. Something happens, your emotions rise, and as time goes on, they gently come down. Sometimes some experiences take longer to subside than others, but most of them follow that trajectory. When you ask yourself, how are you going to feel about this next week, next month, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, it automatically makes intuitive this notion that what you're going through is temporary. It will eventually get better. That turns the volume down on our negative emotions. So that's how you time travel into the future to your benefit. You can also go into the past. It works a little different. So when I experience any big kind of emotional response, I will get into my mental time travel machine. I will go back to 1943, which is when my grandparents were running away from the Nazis, living homeless in the woods, and I hang out with them for a little bit. And I don't have to spend too much time with them before I realize that what I'm going through pales in comparison to what they endured. And that's a powerful way of helping me change the way to think about what I'm going through. And you don't need to have grandparents who survived the Holocaust to do that. We all have personal stories associated with our ancestors and the cultures to which we belong that you can anchor on to do that kind of shift. And so mental time travel, it's not always about being in the moment. Sometimes being in the moment can be good, but I benefit a lot from going back and forth in time.
I think that's really fascinating. And as you described it, it reminded me a little bit of watching films, actually. I don't remember if that's something that you address, if that's like almost another way.
Tell me more.
Well,
the transporting, taking you to different places.
Yeah. So
sorry, you got me excited.
Sure? Well, I'll make it quick. But so
no, take your time.
I got very into sci-fi through my husband, and I have found it so profoundly philosophical, combined with this incredible imagery. And I feel like it has become a way for me to sort of wrestle with my own existential angst, which has an emotional quality to it. But I'm sort of like processing through a kind of mental time travel.
Yeah.
And it's so intense in the same way that what you're describing, imagining about your own family members, is also like very intense, but it has the same effect of sort of shifting your emotions, right?
Totally. Well, it's interesting that you bring up film. Movies, television, I think this is a medium that often it's an emotion regulation medium. That's why we go to film and television, to have ourselves be shifted. Now, I sometimes get kind of upset when I go into a movie and it takes me somewhere I don't want to go. I'm like, you didn't use informed consent here.
Interesting.
Like, I didn't give you permission to take me here. Mm-hmm. And I actually am pretty strategic about what I watch before bed. Mm-hmm. So I watch these ridiculously silly comedy reels on social media just to put me in a happy spot. I don't like watching anything heavy, like no serial killers or anything like that. Some people like that and the effect that it has on them emotionally. They're experiencing these negative emotions in a safe context. Not me.
That's really surprising.
Not me. But so you're right. So film, I mean, this is a way of pushing our emotions. And you seem like you've got it down though, how you use it.
Oh yeah, I'm super sensitive. I would never touch anything like too heavy or intense.
So give us a movie. Give us a movie that we should all.
I mean, I definitely love both like Star Wars franchises and like all the Star Trek and so definitely did not really grow up with that, but got into it later and I was like, wow, I can see why
people like it.
So into this. But anyways, so let's talk about the other shifters.
Sure.
So you have like these series of different shifters. Where would you like to go next?
Well, we talked about perspective and we talked about sensation. Why don't we quickly just touch on attention, just to kind of wrap up those internal ones, and maybe we could bust a myth in the process because that's always fun to do. So we busted one myth, by the way. You may not have realized it, but this myth that you should always be in the moment. We now know that's poo-poo, yeah? Science, technical term. Avoidance is toxic. You guys heard that one? Don't avoid things. You should really like kind of get in there and process. Also not exactly correct. So it is true that chronically avoiding things is not good. So if you're, anything that happens, you're going to actively repress and deny and not go there. This is not good. The problem is culture has recognized this, popular culture, and overgeneralized to say you can either approach or avoid. You got to make a choice and you should just approach. That's not how we work. We can actually be flexible. We can go back and forth. And research suggests that can be really useful. And so let me give you a very common, you will tell me if it's a relatable example. I'm going to take it from my own life. So I have learned, so I should back up. I was someone who was raised to dive into the problem when it occurs. Don't avoid it. Deal with it right there in the moment. I have learned, I have some battle scars that have taught me that isn't always useful. So when I get into an argument with my wife, for example, I have learned that sometimes immediately after the argument occurs, and I'm usually the reason I'm at fault here. Even if I try to apologize, I've realized sometimes it's to my advantage. It's to our relationship's advantage to actually like leave it alone for a couple of hours, sometimes even more than a couple of hours, like a day or two, and then come back to it after that time period. And when I do, the volume has subsided. We can look at it from a fresher perspective, and it's a lot easier for us to work through this. That's an example of being strategic with my ability to avoid and then approach. Taking some time away, and then I'm coming back to it, right? Like I get the email in another case that really pisses me off. Does anyone else get those emails ever? Mm-hmm. No one. You're making me feel very alone here.
The campaign just ended.
Okay, so some of you, right? You don't respond right away. You regret if you do. So attention, essentially, you wanna be flexible with your attention and recognize that there's a time and a place to avoid and a time and place to approach, and when to go back and forth. And so I go through like a decision tree of how to figure that out in the book. And so that's another shifter.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so useful to have these myth busters. I think it's really important. It's really interesting. Again, I think it goes back to what we can often find intuitively. Like I know I went through that in my own journey. Like, I'm a journalist and I read about psychology. So I would come across all these studies and you hear these things and they're in all the magazines. And I definitely reached a point where I was just like, you know what? This does not seem to apply to me.
Yeah.
And I felt okay about that and I accepted that. And I realized that sometimes the things that are really hammered, like, in all the big articles or whatever, it's like often the opposite for me. But I think it's empowering.
Yeah, and I think that brings up perhaps the most important point of the book, which is that there are no one-size-fits-all solutions for shifting. There are lots of different tools, and what we are learning is that not only different tools, but different combinations of tools work for different people. And so just to give you some data to support that idea, we did these massive studies during COVID where we tracked people over time. Every day we asked them, what did you do to manage your COVID anxiety? And then we indexed how anxious they were. We wanted to see, is there a unicorn strategy or set of strategies that just works across the board? Did not exist. There were indeed combinations of tools that were very effective for helping curtail people's anxiety. But there was huge variability. The 3 or 4 things that I did were quite different than the 4 or 5 that you did and the 2 or 3 that you did. And so the metaphor that I find really useful to think about this is actually physical fitness. How many people here work out, exercise? Okay, a lot of you. But you're doing the undergrad thing, Michigan undergrad thing. You know what the Michigan undergrad thing is? This is a perplexing phenomenon. So I've got kids in elementary and high school. It's a detour, but we have some time. Kids before college, when you ask them a question, like this, and then they get to college and it goes like this, and it never comes back. So you guys you did this, you did it. So remember, this is very helpful for us up here. I digress. You all go to the gym. You all work out in some way. How many people here like to run? Okay. Weight training, resistance training. Okay. Cycling, Pilates, yoga, dance. Okay. Huge amounts of variability here, right? Lots of different ways to get to the goal of being physically fit. The same seems to be true for emotional fitness. There are lots of different exercises, lots of different tactics you can engage in to achieve this goal. I can give you the tactics that scientists have discovered. That is what the book is about. Here are the shifters. What I cannot do, and what I don't think any scientist on the planet can do right now, is diagnose specific combinations of tools for each and every one of you. We don't yet have the understanding to do that, which should be not a bummer, but should be liberating, a relief. Because what it means for all of you is familiarize yourself with the tools and then start self-experimenting. Start figuring out which ones work well for me. And if you tried mindfulness and meditation and it didn't work for you, you don't have to beat yourself up about this. Oh my God, it doesn't work for me. It works for everyone in the universe. What's wrong with me? That's how we work. That variability exists. So your comment about things not resonating, you're not alone there. I think that's a universal.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, I think people, we're all on our own journeys, right? We all have to find what works for us and what doesn't work. And can you talk a little bit more about other mythbusters that you explored, or in conjunction with some of the other shifters?
Sure. So let me just rattle off a few. You should always strive to live lives free of negativity. Just emphasize the positive. Myth.
Yeah.
Negative emotions, as long as they're not experienced out of proportion, serve a really useful function. We evolve the capacity to experience negative emotions for a reason. When I think back to presentations that I've given that haven't really, landed or sparkled, they're inevitably the presentations when I experience no anxiety beforehand. As a result, I had no motivating force to tell me to actually prepare. So I just showed up and I winged it. A little bit of anxiety is a cue that says, hey, buckle down, focus, there's something important up ahead. That can be really useful. There's a functionality to all of those negative experiences, as long as they don't get too big. Shift, the book, is there to help us when they get too big. But if you experience negative emotions, there is nothing wrong with you. To the contrary, I think there's everything right with you. This is a good thing. So, hopefully that is a liberating message too. If you have doubts about this, here is the experience to think about. Physical pain. Who here likes physical pain? No one. Okay. No masochists in the audience. I like physical pain probably less than all of you here. I am a giant baby. I stay away from the doctor. Sometimes it's a problem, right? But I recognize the value it serves. So you can ask yourself, what would life be like if we never experienced physical pain? Sounds kind of good, right? Well, we actually know what life would be like because there are kids that are born into the world incapable of experiencing physical pain due to a genetic disorder. And if you look at their lives aren't so good. They actually die young because their hand gets caught in the stove and there's no cue to tell them to pull it back. So pain can be functional. It is functional in the right proportion. So this toxic positivity stuff has got to go bye-bye, basically. If, negative emotions a little bit, that's good. Emotion regulation, shifting has to be hard. Not true. Put on Don't Stop Believing. You will see your emotions shifted. It's really easy. And there are lots of other easy tools out there. We've busted the myth about being in the moment. Also not true. What about venting? Let's talk maybe about venting.
That's a good one.
Okay, we often hear that venting is really good. How many of you really enjoy just finding someone to just get it all out with? Just get it. There's a seductive allure to just doing it. And yet, I think it's, for many, a guilty pleasure of sorts. You kind of know that maybe this isn't totally productive. And the research, you look like you're ready for the disclaimer here. So here is the deal with venting. Venting your emotions to someone else can be very good for relationships. It's good to know that there's someone who's willing to listen to you, to empathize with you, to normalize what you're going through. The problem with venting is if all you do is vent about a problem, you leave that conversation often just as upset about the issue, if not more upset than when you started. Because you've just spent an hour to 7 hours, however long you're doing this, just rehashing all the stuff that's driving you nuts. So if I vent to you, I leave the conversation. I feel great about our relationship, but the problem is still there. The best kinds of conversations about problematic experiences do two things. First, it is important to share it out, to vent and establish those bonds. But after you do that, you are ideally talking to a person like Janera who is going to help broaden my perspective, right? So she lets me get it out. Once she's got a sense that I've felt relief, you might say, well, what would you do if you were in my shoes? Or have you ever been in this situation before? How'd you deal with it last time? So doing things to actually work with the person to help them work it through. So venting alone, not so good. So those are a couple of the myths.
Yeah. This has been so great, so helpful. I think keeping in mind these shifters, how we can use them in our daily lives. And there's so much more in the book, and Ethan is such an incredible storyteller. So, make sure you do get the book. He'll be signing outside.
And thank you again, Dr. Cross and Janera.
Thank you.
Thank you.